Hello, good evening. Welcome back to the Folk Tales by the Fireside. This evening I would like to read for you Guleesh from the Celtic Fairytales, collected and annotated and introduced by Joseph Jacobs. There was once a boy in the County Mayo. Guleesh was his name. There was the finest rath a little way off from the gable of the house, and he was often in the habit of seating himself on the fine grass bank that was running round it. One night he stood, half leaning against the gable of the house, and looking up into the sky and watching the beautiful white moon over his head. After he had been standing that way for a couple of hours, he said to himself, "My bitter grief that I'm not gone away out of this place altogether. I'd sooner be any place in the world than here. Oh, it's well for you, white moon," says he, "that's turning round as you please yourself, and no man can put you back. I wish I was the same as you." Hardly was the word out of his mouth when he heard a great noise coming like the sound of many people running together and talking and laughing and making sport, and the sound went by him like a whirl of wind, and he was listening to it going into the rath. "Musha, by my soul," says he, "but you're merry enough. I'll follow you." What was in it but the fairy host? Though he did not know at first that was who were in it, that it was they who were in it. But he followed them into the rath. It's there he heard the full parnee and the fall parnee, the raplay hooter and the rulia bulia that they had there, and every man of them crying out as loud as he could, "My horse and bridle and saddle, my horse and bridle and saddle." "By my hand," said Guleesh, "my boy, that's not bad. I'll imitate you." And he cried out as well as they, "My horse and bridle and saddle, my horse and bridle and saddle." On the moment, there was a fine horse with a bridle of gold, a saddle of silver standing before him. He leaped upon it, and the moment he was on its back, he saw clearly that the rath was full of horses, and of little people going riding on them. Said a man of them to him, "Are you coming with us tonight, Guleesh?" "I am surely," said Guleesh. "If you are, come along," said the little man. And out they went all together, riding like the wind, faster than the fastest horse you ever saw a-hunting, and faster than the fox and the hounds at his tail. The cold winter's wind that was before them, they overtook her, and the cold winter's wind that was behind them, she did not overtake them. And stop nor stay of that full race did they make none, until they came unto the brink of the sea. Then every one of them said, "High over cap, high over cap," and that moment they were up in the air. And before Guleesh had time to remember where he was, they were down on dry land again, and were going like the wind. At last they stood still, and a man of them said to Guleesh, "Guleesh, do you know where you are?" "Not a know," says Guleesh. "You're in France, Guleesh," said he. "The daughter of the King of France is to be married tonight, the handsomest woman that the sun ever saw, and we must do our best to bring her with us, if we're only able to carry her off. And you must come with us, that we may be able to put the young girl up behind you on the horse, and we'll be bringing her away. For it's not lawful for us to put her sitting behind ourselves." But you're flesh and blood, and she can take a good grip of you, and she won't fall off the horse. Are you satisfied, Guleesh? And will you do what we're telling you?" "Why shouldn't I be satisfied?" said Guleesh. "I'm satisfied, surely, and anything that you will tell me to do, I'll do without doubt." They got off their horses there, and a man of them said a word that Guleesh did not understand, and on that moment they were lifted up. And Guleesh found himself and his companions in the palace. There was a great feast going on there, and there was not a nobleman or a gentleman in the kingdom, but was gathered there, dressed in silk and satin and gold and silver, and the night was as bright as the day, with all the lamps and candles that were lit. Guleesh had to shut his 2 eyes at the brightness. When he opened them again and looked from him, he thought he never saw anything as fine as all he saw there. There were 100 tables spread out, and there, full of meat and drink on each table of them, flesh meat, cakes, sweetmeats, wine, ale, and every drink that a man ever saw. The musicians were at the 2 ends of the hall, and they were playing the sweetest music that ever a man's ear heard. And there were young women in fine youths in the middle, dancing and turning and going round so quickly and so lightly that it put a suron in Guleesh's head to be looking at them. There were more there playing tricks, and more making fun and laughing, for such a feast as there was that day had not been in France for 20 years, because the old king had no children alive, but only the one daughter, and she was to be married to the son of another king that night. 3 days and the feast was going on, and the 3rd night she was to be married. And that was the night that Guleesh and the sheehogues came, hoping, if they could, to carry off with them the king's young daughter. Guleesh and his companions were standing together at the head of the hall, where there was a fine altar dressed up and 2 bishops behind it waiting to marry the girl, as soon as the right time should come. Now, nobody could see the sheehogues, for they said a word when they came in that made them all invisible, as if they had not been in it at all. "Tell me which of them is the king's daughter," said Guleesh, when he was becoming a little used to the noise and light. "Didn't you see her there, away from you?" said the little man that he was talking to. Guleesh looked where the little man was pointing with his finger, and there he saw the loveliest woman that was, he thought, upon the ridge of the world. The rose and the lily were fighting together in her face, and one could not tell which of them got the victory. Her arms and hands were like the lime, her mouth as red as a strawberry when it is ripe. Her foot was as small and as light as another one's hand. Her form was smooth and slender, and her hair was falling down from her head in buckles of gold. Her garments and dress were woven with gold and silver, and the bright stone that was in the ring on her hand was shining as the sun. Guleesh was nearly blinded with all the loveliness and beauty that was in her. But when he looked again, he saw that she was crying, and that there was the trace of tears in her eyes. "It can't be," said Guleesh, "that there's grief on her when everybody round her is so full of sport and merriment." "Musha, then she is grieved," said the little man, "for it is against her own will she's marrying. for she has no love of the husband she is to marry. The king was going to give her to him 3 years ago when she was only 15, but she said she was too young and requested him to leave her as she was yet. The king gave her a year's grace, and when that year was up, he gave her another year's grace, and then another. But a week or a day he would not give her any longer, and she is 18 years old tonight, and it's time for her to marry. But indeed, says he, and he crooked his mouth in an ugly way. Indeed, it's no king's son she'll marry if I can help it. Guleesh pitied the handsome young lady greatly when he heard that. And he was heartbroken to think it would be necessary for her to marry a man she did not like, or, what was worse, to take a nasty she-goat for a husband. However, he did not say a word, though he could not help giving many a curse to the ill luck that was laid out for himself, to be helping the people that were to snatch her away from her home and from her father. He began thinking then, what it was he ought to do to save her, but he could think of nothing. If only I could give her some help and relief, said he. I wouldn't care whether I were alive or dead, but I see nothing that I can do for her. He was looking on when the king's son came up to her and asked her for a kiss, but she turned her head away from him. Guleesh had double pity for her then, when he saw the lad taking her by the soft white hand and drawing her out to dance. They went round in the dance near where Guleesh was, and he could plainly see that there were tears in her eyes. When the dancing was over, the old king, her father, and her mother, the queen, came up and said this was the right time to marry her, that the bishop was ready, and that it was time to put the wedding ring on her and give her to her husband. The king took the youth by the hand, and the queen took her daughter, and they went up together to the altar, where the lords and great people were following them. When they came near the altar, and were no more than about 4 yards from it, the little she-goat stretched out his foot before the girl, and she fell. Before she was able to rise again, he threw something that was in his hand upon her, said a couple of words, and upon that moment the maiden was gone from amongst them. Nobody could see her, for that word made her invisible. The little maneen seized her and raised her up behind Guleesh, and the king, nor anyone else, saw them, but out with them through the hall till they came to the door. Oh, dear Mary, it's the pity that was, and the trouble, and the crying, and the wonder, and the searching, and the rookhorn. When that lady disappeared from their eyes, and without their seeing what did it. Out of the door of the palace they went, without being stopped or hindered, for nobody saw them. And my horse, my bridle and saddle, says every man of them. My horse, my bridle and saddle, says Guleesh. And on the moment the horse was standing ready, caprisoned before him. Now, jump up, Guleesh, said the little man, and put the lady behind you, and we will be going. The morning's not far off from us now. Guleesh raised her up on the horse's back, and leapt up himself before her. Rise, horse, said he, and his horse and the other horses went with him in a full race until they came to the sea. High over cap, said every man of them. High over cap, said Guleesh. And on that moment the horse rose under him and cut a leap in the clouds and came down in Erin. They did not stop there, but went of a race to the place where was Guleesh's house and the rath. And when they came as far as that, Guleesh turned and caught the girl in his 2 arms and leapt off the horse. I call and cross you to myself, in the name of God, said he. And on the spot, before the word was out of his mouth, the horse fell down, and what was in it but the beam of a plough, of which they had made a horse, and every other horse they had. It was that way that they made it. Some of them were riding an old besom, some a broken stick, and some more on a bohalon, or a hemlock stalk. The good people called out together when they heard what Guleesh said. Oh, Guleesh, you clown, you thief! That's no good. No good may happen to you. Why did you play that trick on us? But they had no power at all to carry off the girl after Guleesh had consecrated her to himself. Oh, Guleesh, isn't that a nice turn you did us? And we were so kind to you. What good have we now out of our journey to France? Never mind yet, you clown, but you'll pay us another time for this. Believe us, you'll repent it. He'll have no good to get out of the young girl, said the little man that was talking to him in the palace before that. And he said the word, as he said the word, he moved over to her and struck her a slap on the side of the head. Now, says he, she'll be without talk any more. Now, Guleesh, what good will she be to you when she'll be dumb? It's time for us to go, but you'll remember us, Guleesh. When he said that, he stretched out his 2 hands, and before Guleesh was able to give an answer, he and the rest of them were gone into the rath, out of sight, and he saw them no more. He turned to the young woman and said to her, Thanks be to God, they're gone. Would you not sooner stay with me than stay with them? She gave him no answer. There's trouble and grief on her yet, said Guleesh in his own mind, and spoke to her again. I'm afraid you must spend this night in my father's house, lady, and if there is anything that I can do for you, tell me, and I'll be your servant. The beautiful girl remained silent, but there were tears in her eyes, and her face was white and red after each other. Lady, said Guleesh, tell me what you would like me to do now. I never belonged at all to that lot of she-hogs who carried you away with them. I am the son of an honest farmer, and I went with them without knowing it. I'll be able to send you back to your father. If I'll be able to send you back to your father, I'll do it. And I pray you make use of me now that you may wish. He looked into her face, and he saw the mouth moving as if she was going to speak, but no word came from it. It cannot be, said Guleesh, that you are dumb. Did I not hear you speaking to the king's son in the palace tonight? Or has that devil made you really dumb when he struck his nasty hand on your jaw? The girl raised her white, smooth hand and laid her finger on her tongue to show him she had lost her voice and power of speech, and the tears ran out of her 2 eyes like streams. Guleesh's own eyes were not dry, for as rough as he was on the outside, he had a soft heart. He could not stand the sight of the young girl, and she in that unhappy plight. He began thinking with himself what he ought to do, and he did not like to bring her home with himself to his father's house, for he knew well that they would not believe him that he had been in France and brought her back with him, the King of France's daughter, and he was afraid that they might make a mock of the young lady or insult her. As he was doubting what he ought to do and hesitating, he chanced to remember the priest. "Glory be to God," said he, "I now know what I'll do. I'll bring her to the priest's house. He won't refuse me to keep the lady and care her." He turned to the lady again and told her that he was loath to take her to his father's house, but that there was a very excellent priest, very friendly to himself, who would take good care of her, and if she wished to remain in his house, but that if there were any other place she would rather go, he said he would bring her to it. She bent her head to show him she was obliged, and gave him to understand she was ready to follow him any place he was going. "We will go to the priest's house, then," she said. Said he, "He is under an obligation to me and will do anything I ask him." They went together accordingly to the priest's house, and the sun was just rising when they came to the door. Guleesh beat it hard, and as early as it was, the priest was up and opened the door for himself. He wondered when he saw Guleesh and the girl, for he was certain that it was coming. Wanting to be married, they were. "Guleesh, Guleesh, isn't it the nice boy that you are, that you can't wait until 10 o'clock or 12, but that you must be coming to me at this hour looking for marriage for you and your sweetheart? You ought to know that I can't marry you at such a time, or, all events, can't marry you lawfully." "But, boo," said he, suddenly, as he turned and looked again at the young girl. "In the name of God, who have you here? Who is she? How did you get her?" "Father," said Guleesh, "you can marry me or anybody else if you wish, but it's not looking for marriage I came to you now, but to ask you, if you please, to give a lodging in your house to this young lady." The priest looked at him as though he had 10 heads on him, but without putting any other question to him, he desired him to come in himself and the maiden, and when they came in, he shut the door, brought them into the parlour, and put them sitting. "Now, Guleesh," he said, "tell me truly, who is this young lady, and whether you're out of your senses really, or are you making a joke of me?" "I'm not telling a word of a lie, nor making a joke of you," said Guleesh. "But it was from the palace of the King of France I carried off this lady, and she is the daughter of the King of France." He began his story then, and told the whole to the priest, and the priest was so much surprised that he could not help calling out at times or clapping his hands together. When Guleesh said from what he saw he thought the girl was not satisfied with the marriage that was going to take place before he and the she-hogues broke it up, but there came a red blush into the girl's cheek, and he was more certain than ever that she had sooner be as she was, badly as she was, than be the married wife of the man she hated. When Guleesh said that he would be very thankful to the priest if he would keep her in his own house, the kind man said he would do that as long as Guleesh pleased, but that he did not know what they ought to do with her, because they had no means of sending her back to her father again. Guleesh answered that he was uneasy about the same thing, that he saw nothing to do but keep quiet until they should find some opportunity of doing something better. They made it up then between themselves that the priest should let on that it was his brother's daughter he had, who was come on a visit to him from another country, and that he should tell everybody that she was dumb and do his best to keep everyone away from her. They told the young girl what it was they intended to do, and she showed by her eyes that she was obliged to them. Guleesh went home then, and when his people asked him where he had been, he said that he had been asleep at the foot of a ditch and had passed the night there. There was great wonderment on the priest's neighbours as the girl, who came so suddenly to his house, and without anyone knowing where she was from or what business she had there. Some of the people said that everything was not as it ought to be, and others that Guleesh was not like the same man that was in it before, and that it was a great story how he was drawing every day to the priest's house, and that the priest had a wish and a respect for him, a thing they could not clear up at all. That was true for them, indeed, for it was seldom the day went by Guleesh would go to the priest's house and have a talk with him, and as often as he would come, he used to hope to find the young lady well again, and with leave to speak. But alas, she remained dumb and silent, without relief or cure. Since she had no means of talking, she carried on a sort of conversation between herself and himself by moving her hand and fingers, winking her eyes, opening and shutting her mouth, laughing or smiling, and 1,000 other signs, so that it was not long until they understood each other very well. Guleesh was always thinking how he should send her back to her father, but there was no one to go with her, and he himself didn't know what road to go, for he had never been out of his own country before the night she had been brought away with him, nor had the priest any better knowledge than he. But when Guleesh asked him, he wrote 3 or 4 letters to the King of France and gave them to buyers and sellers of wares who used to be going from place to place across the sea, but they all went astray, and never one came to the king's hand. This was the way they were for many months. Guleesh was falling deeper and deeper in love with her every day, and it was plain to himself and the priest that she liked him. The boy feared greatly at last, lest the king should really hear where his daughter was and take her back for himself, and besought the priest to write no more but to leave the matter to God. So they passed the time for a year, until there came a day when Guleesh was lying by himself on the grass, on the last day of the month in autumn, and he was thinking over again in his own mind of everything that happened to him from the day that he went with the she-goats across the sea. He remembered then suddenly that it was one November night that he was standing at the gable of the house when the whirlwind came and the she-goats in it. And he said to himself, "We have November night again today, and I'll stand in the same place I was last year until I see if the good people come again. Perhaps I might see or hear something that would be useful to me and might bring back her talk again to Mary." That was the name himself and the priest called the king's daughter, for neither of them knew her right name. He told his intention to the priest, and the priest gave his blessing. Guleesh accordingly went to the old rath, when the night was darkening, and he stood with his bent elbow leaning on a grey old flag, waiting till the middle of the night should come. The moon rose slowly, and it was like a knob of fire behind him, and there was a white fog which was raised up over the fields of grass and all damp places, through the coolness of the night after a great heat in the day. The night was calm, as is a lake when there is not a breath of wind to move a wave on it, and there was no sound to be heard but the cronon of the insects that would go by from time to time, or the hoarse, sudden scream of the wild geese as they passed from lake to lake, half a mile up in the air over his head, or the sharp whistle of the gold and green plover, rising and lying, lying and rising, as they do on a calm night. There were 1,000 bright stars shining overhead, and there was a little frost out which left the grass under his foot white and crisp. He stood there for an hour, for 2 hours. Then the frost increased greatly, so that he heard the breaking of the tranines under his foot as often as he moved. He was thinking in his own mind at last that the she-hogs would not come that night, and that it was no good for him to return back again, when he heard a sound far away from him, coming towards him, and he recognised what it was at the first moment. The sound increased, and at first it was like the beating of waves on the stony shore, and then it was like the falling of a great waterfall, and at last it was like the loud storm in the tops of the trees, and then the whirlwind burst into the wrath of one rout, and the she-hogs were in it. It all went by him so suddenly that he lost his breath with it, but he came himself to the spot and put an ear on himself, listening to what they would say. Scarcely had they gathered into the wrath, they all began shouting and screaming, talking amongst themselves, and then one of them cried out, "My horse and bridle and saddle! My horse, bridle and saddle!" Guleesh took courage and called out as loudly as any of them, "My horse, bride and saddle! My horse, bride and saddle!" But before the words were out of his mouth, another man cried, "Ora, Guleesh, my boy, are you here with us again? How are you getting on with your woman? There is no use in your calling for your horse tonight. I'll go bail you won't play such a trick on us again. It was a good trick you played on us last year." "It was," said another man. "He won't do it again." "Isn't he a prime lad, the same lad, to take a woman with him that never said as much to him as 'How do you do?' since this time last year?" said the third man. "Perhaps he likes to be looking at her," said another voice. "And if the Omidon only knew that there's a herb growing up by his own door, if he were to boil it and give it to her, she'd be well," said another voice. "That's true for you. He is an Omidon. Don't bother your head with him. We'll be going. We'll leave the bodach as he is." And with that they rose up in the air. Out with them, with one rulia-bulia the way they came. And they left poor Guleesh standing where they found him, and the two eyes going out of his head, looking after them and wondering. He didn't stand long till he returned back, and he thinking in his own mind on all he saw and heard, and wondering whether there really was a herb at his own door that would bring back the talk of the king's daughter. "It can't be," says he to himself, "that they would tell it to me, if there was any virtue in it, but perhaps the she-hog didn't observe himself when he let the word slip out of his mouth. I'll search well as soon as the sun rises whether there's any plant growing beside the house except thistles and dockings." He went home, and as tired as he was, he did not sleep a wink until the sun rose on the morrow. He got up then, and it was the first thing he did to go out and search through the grass round about the house, trying could he get any herb that he didn't recognise. And indeed he was not long searching till he observed a large strange herb that was growing up just by the gable of the house. He went over to it and observed it closely, and saw that there were 7 little branches coming out of the stalk, and 7 leaves growing on every branch of them, and that there was a white sap in the leaves. "It's very wonderful," he said to himself. "I never noticed this herb before. If there's any virtue in an herb at all, it ought to be in such a strange one as this." He drew out his knife, cut the plant, and carried it in his own house, stripped the leaves off it, cut up the stalk. There came a thick white juice out of it, and there comes out of the sow, as there comes out of the sow thistle when it is bruised, except that the juice was more like oil. He put it in a little pot with a little water in it. He laid it on the fire till the water was boiling. Then he took a cup, filled it half with the juice, and put it to his own mouth. It came into his head that perhaps it was poison, that the good people were only tempting him that he might kill himself with that trick, or put the girl to death without meaning it. He put down the cup again, raised a couple of drops on the top of his finger, put it to his mouth. It was not bitter, and indeed had a sweet, agreeable taste. He grew bolder and drank a full thimbleful of it, and then as much again, and he never stopped till he had half the cup drunk. He fell asleep after that, and did not wake until it was night, and there was a great hunger and a great thirst on him. He had to wait then till the day rose, but he determined as soon as he should wake in the morning that he would go to the king's daughter and give her a drink of the juice of the herb. As soon as he got up in the morning, he went over to the priest's house with the drink in his hand. He never felt himself so bold and valiant and spirited and light as he was that day, and he was quite certain that it was the drink he drank which made him so hearty. When he came to the house, he found the priest and the young lady within, and they were wondering greatly why he had not visited them for 2 days. He told them all his news, and said that he was certain that there was great power in the herb, and that it would do the lady no hurt, for he had tried it himself and got good from it. Then he made her taste it, for he vowed and swore that there was no harm in it. Guleesh handed her the cup, and she drank half of it, and then fell back on the bed, and a heavy sleep came on her, and she never woke out of that sleep till the day on the morrow. Guleesh and the priest sat the entire night with her, waiting till she should awake, and they, between hope and unhope, between expectation of saving her and fear of hurting her. She awoke at last when the sun had gone half in its way through the heavens. She rubbed her eyes and looked like a person who did not know where she was. She was like one astonished when she saw Guleesh and the priest in the same room with her, and she sat up doing her best to collect her thoughts. The 2 men were in great anxiety to see would she speak, or would she not speak. And when they remained silent for a couple of minutes, the priest said to her, "Did you sleep well, Mary?" And she answered him, "I slept, thank you." No sooner did Guleesh hear her talking than he put a shout of joy out of him, ran over to her, and fell on his 2 knees and said, "1,000 thanks to God, who has given you back the talk, lady of my heart, Speak again to me." The lady answered him that she understood it was he who boiled that drink for her and gave it to her, and for that she was obliged to him from her heart for all the kindness he had shown her since the day he first came to Ireland, and that he might be certain that she would never forget it. Guleesh was ready to die with satisfaction and delight. Then they brought her food, and she ate with a good appetite, and was merry and joyous, and never left off talking with the priest while she was eating. After that, Guleesh went home and stretched himself on the bed and fell asleep again, for the force of the herb was not all spent, and he passed another day and a night sleeping. When he woke up, he went back to the priest's house and found that the young lady was in the same state, and that she was asleep almost since the time that he left the house. He went into her chamber with the priest, and they remained watching beside her till she awoke the second time. And she had her talk as well as ever, and Guleesh was greatly rejoiced. The priest put the food on the table again, and they ate together. And Guleesh used after that to come to the house from day to day, and the friendship that was between them and him and the king's daughter increased, because she had no one to speak to except Guleesh and the priest, and she liked Guleesh best. So they married one another, and that was the fine wedding they had. And if I were to be there then, I would not be here now, but I heard it from a birdeen that was there. I heard it from a birdeen that there was neither cark nor care, sickness nor sorrow, mishap nor misfortune on them till the hour of their death. And may the same be with me and with us all. I hope you enjoyed that, and I wish you all a fabulous start to November, and hopefully we will get lots more of these tales out over the next couple of weeks. Until next time, bye for now.